Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast. My name is Clint.
And I'm Jacob.
And we're glad that you are tuning back in again here for episode 23 as we start to look as the season winds down here in Ohio. It's starting to feel like fall just a little bit, which means that winter is coming quickly. But we still have some things going on. Jacob was out at the racetrack this weekend, Fremont. What else did you see going on at Fremont this past weekend?
So Fremont had their end of the year race, the Jim and Joanne Ford Classic. So Friday night we saw Tim Schaefer take the victory pretty convincingly over the field. It was going to be really cool watching him and Caleb Griffith battle, but Caleb unfortunately crashed and Tim ran away with it Friday night. And Saturday night was the big $10,000 to win show. And some guy named Christopher Bell kind of showed up in his first night out in his own sprint car and, lapped up to sixth place and won by over 7 seconds after starting 13th. So Christopher Bell took home a nice $10,000 on Saturday night and just kind of dominated the field. It was just an ass whooping, really.
That's a pretty slick-looking black and white number 21.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it looks really similar to the Tarleton 21 out in California, but that was probably one of the nicest cars I have seen all year. Simple, sleek. I loved it.
Awesome. And then you said you went to some go-kart racing on Sunday, right? So
earlier in the week, I had seen a conversation on Twitter between, I think, Dan McFarland and Dan McCarran talking about the Clyde Grand Prix. And I'd wanted to go to it for a couple of years, but I'd never known when it was. So Sunday, I got home from Fremont at 6 a.m. after hanging out with Brian Smith and Chris Ferda. And so I got home at 6 a.m., and I believe I was in Clyde by noon. They had about 100 go-karts between, I think, 8 or 10 classes. And I got to hang out in the shit cane, just watch these guys wreck, and it was pretty cool watching them. They had no fear driving on the streets of Clyde, had the pits, on all these side streets. And what I found most amazing was that the residents supported this event like crazy. Like the residents in Clyde that are along the racetrack, they can't get in or out of their house with their car all day. So they're supportive of this event, and they let it go on. It's Ohio's longest-running Grand Prix, actually. This was its 28th year. And something else that I thought was really cool is that the Clyde FFA came in at about 5 a.m. on Sunday to set up the track, which involved laying down over 3,500 straw bales all along the half-mile track. And then after the racing was over, they were going to clean it up. So definitely a huge shout-out to the residents and the FFA of Clyde for really helping this event take off.
Yeah, I saw some images of that. There were a lot of bales out there, and it looks like a pretty intense event. I will have to check that out next year.
It was definitely an event. They have so many food vendors that I could have had, but it was definitely cool. I'll definitely be going back next year.
Awesome. So Fremont, Clyde over the weekend, and then we saw some announcements coming out. Maybe some drivers changing their rides or getting some new opportunities. Obviously, Buddy Kofoid got out in a KKM midget last weekend.
Yeah, that was some pretty big news that Buddy was able to go join KKM for Friday night out in Illinois, and he won his heat, started on pole of the feature, and he led every single lap to get his first midget win. And I think there's going to be more of that to come. It looks like Buddy's going to be in the KKM sprint car tonight, Wednesday at Jacksonville. So it seems like they're going to have a pretty good alliance.
Right, I saw that. So we're recording this on Wednesday. It'll roll out on Thursday. So we'll see what happens as he goes up against the Field of Outlaws tonight in Jacksonville, right?
Yeah, I'll be watching for sure. I don't know if there's like a buddy watch party at the Linder's house tonight, but it would. I'd imagine a lot of people are going to be tuned in from this area.
Right. Watch party with milkshakes.
Yes, milkshakes and juice boxes.
There you go. Awesome. Any other notable driver changes that you've seen or that we know about yet?
Nothing really that I can talk about.
Yeah, okay. I'm not going to ask you to talk about
Yeah. But yeah, it's been pretty quiet so far. I know there's some rumblings out on the road, but so far it's been pretty quiet.
All right. This weekend coming up at Eldora, we have the Four Crown Nationals. So some pretty notable drivers are going to be making their way out for that one. I believe Rico's going to be there in a midget, if I saw that correctly this morning. And did I see Selzy's coming from California?
I believe so. I think Dominic's coming out. He'll be at Kokomo on Sunday, too.
Yeah, so they'll bring some other drivers into Ohio for the weekend and may run some other races around this event. All right, so with that being said, let's move towards our interview here. We had an opportunity to talk with the marketing director for Knoxville Speedway. On the phone today, we have partially Ohio's own, Knoxville's own, and working in Charlotte for the past few years, but now has relocated back to Ohio. Here's our conversation with Kendra Jacobs. Okay, so today we are very excited to be on the phone with Kendra Jacobs, marketing director for Knoxville Speedway and Spire Sports. Kendra, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So you guys are winding down a little bit, as we all are here for the racing season. Are you traveling back and forth between Ohio and Knoxville at this point, or are you still in Knoxville?
No, I'm actually, I live in Ohio during the off season. So I am back in Ohio for the time being. I'll still go back and forth for some meetings, obviously our banquet next month, just to keep things going and stay in touch with the community out there over the off season, and then move back in mid-April.
We really wanted to reach out to you and get you on the podcast because we are the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast, and your racing roots did begin here in Ohio. A lot of people may not know that, but did you grow up in the Mid-Ohio area? Tell us a little bit about where you came from and how you ended up going the Charlotte direction and then ultimately Knoxville.
Yeah, so I was raised in Holmesville, Ohio, which is a tiny speck of a dot on a map in northeast Ohio. It's actually about halfway between Cleveland and Columbus, and then a little east. My dad was a race car driver, Kendra Jacobs. And of course, his dad was a driver. His grandfather built Wayne County Speedway. My brother races, my uncle races, my cousin Cody's a crew chief. So everybody in our family is involved in racing or was raised in racing and just stayed in it. And that's what kind of happened to me is I was spent almost every weekend going to racetracks as a child and kind of thought that that's what everyone did. I didn't understand why my friends at school weren't at the same racetracks as me because I thought everyone spent their weekends at racetracks. And as I grew older, I knew I had, once you get out of high school, your life's going to change and suddenly you have responsibilities and you have to make some decisions. And I knew that I didn't want my involvement in racing to end. So when I went to college, I got a degree in communications, journalism, and English, and knew that I wanted to be in some kind of behind-the-scenes role in motorsports. So I actually went to a kart race back when IndyCar and kart were kind of split in Cleveland, and I was paying more attention to the people behind the scenes and what they were doing than I was to what was going on the track, and I thought that's what I want to do. I want to do the kind of stuff that makes the event happen. So I went to college, got a degree, and knew back then there wasn't a lot of money in sprint car racing, even though that was my passion. I knew it was either going to be Indianapolis or Charlotte. And about a year and a half after I graduated, I moved to Charlotte and was an assistant PR manager for Ricky Rudd. Ironically, Steve Post, who I then many, many years later hosted Wing Nation with was the PR director for Ricky Rudd. So I started my career as Steve Post's assistant, and then it all just kind of spiraled from there.
And you've worked with tons of names. You worked with Penske Racing for a while, if that's correct.
Yep. So I started with Robert Yates Racing and Ricky Rudd, and then went to Dale Earnhardt Incorporated for a year and worked on the Pennzoil car. And then I went to Penske Racing with Ryan Newman and on to Hendrick Motorsports with Kyle Busch, Casey Mears, and ultimately Mark Martin. So really, really great years on the road in NASCAR and got to work with some awesome drivers. Mark was definitely hands down my favorite. And I knew when he was retiring that was it for me too. I couldn't end my career on the road, so to speak, with a better, more professional driver. So when he left, I left.
You ended your NASCAR career with Mark Martin. Is that when you got back into sprint car racing, or was there like another step in between?
Well, during that time, I started co-hosting Wing Nation on MRN with Steve Post. So that got my foot back in the door in sprint car racing. And I also started doing, in 2010, the 50th anniversary of the Knoxville Nationals, I did some infield reporting for their local radio station there. So that got me in the radio world, so to speak, and then MRN also was picked up by MAV TV as a Saturday morning TV show. Awesome stuff. Really got me back connected to the sprint car world and the drivers and teams and owners there. But at the same time, I was still working with Mark at Hendrick, and then when I left NASCAR, I worked for Rick Hendrick at his automotive dealership, Hendrick Automotive Group there in Charlotte for 2 years. During that time, I also started working with the Jeff Gordon Children's Foundation and their Kick It program. So Kick It was a charity kickball game that raised money for children's cancer research. And we started hosting Kick It kickball games at the Knoxville Nationals every year. So that became a really big event. In 3 years, I think we raised nearly, or 4 years, we raised nearly $300,000 for children's cancer research just at Knoxville. So it was an amazing event to be a part of and to work with everybody for such a great cause. And that really, between those two things, with Wing Nation and with Kick It, my wheelhouse, so to speak, was really much more involved in sprint car racing by that point than it was in NASCAR. I was going to races still, but not as many. I was going to almost more sprint car races a year and was much more heavily invested in sprint car racing. So I could kind of see the shift in my career going there. It was just, how do you shift to that direction and still make money? I mean, sprint car racing is not corporate. There's not millions of dollars funneling through like there is in NASCAR and IndyCar. So I kind of had to find my niche, and luckily Spire Sports Entertainment at the time was working with Kyle Larson, and he was talking to them about starting a sprint car team and needed someone to kind of run the PR and marketing side of his sprint car team. So I had known the owner of Spire Sports, Jeff Dickerson. Jeff was actually Kyle Busch's spotter when I was Kyle's PR rep. So Jeff and I had a long history, and he called me and said, I know you're getting back into the sprint car world, and, maybe this is something you'd want to do full time rather than just the radio show and charity work. And we talked about it back and forth a little bit, and I moved to Spire to work on their dirt track stuff. At the time, Rico Abreu was also a client and getting into NASCAR, so I was working with Rico a lot, and it all just kind of spun from there.
So it seems like you've really worked with the who's who of each, like sprint car racing and NASCAR.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really, really lucky to work with some of the best drivers and so many different personalities, really, that makes you even more well-rounded in the sport to know how to deal with different drivers and their needs and how they react to things. That's helped me a lot, not just in racing, but in life in general. And I see every year at Knoxville, now that we're there every year at Knoxville, I get to work with different drivers, specifically champions of the